listening to the Life Edit Project podcast, where busy, ambitious high achievers get the tools they need to fight overwhelm and overthinking with balance, self-mastery, and a positive mindset. I'm your host, Elizabeth Burrows. I'm serving up bite-sized truth bombs in a judgment-free zone based on my perspective as a life coach, wife, mom, and recovering overachiever. We keep it real over here, which usually means some combination of insightful, entertaining, and a hot mess express. So, if you're looking for perfection, look elsewhere. But if you're still with me, let's dig into this week's episode. Good day, good people. If you're new around here, welcome. If you've listened to more than 2 episodes, you ain't a newbie, you're a homie. And to you, I say welcome back. We are going to have a time today. You hear me? A juicy conversation will be had. And when it's over, you're going to have a lot to think about. Because today we're talking about head trash. Yes, head trash. As in garbage thoughts. Did you even know your head was full of trash? Because it absolutely is. But don't feel bad. Everyone's head is full of trash, including mine. And I'm going to tell you more about that in a bit. But first, you know what I want to do. I want to shout out my Listener Bae of the week. A Listener Bae is anyone who leaves a 5-star rating and review for this podcast on Apple Podcasts. There are a few of you out there, and I'm grateful for all of you. This week, I am shining the spotlight on a listener with the username Noonybird. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. The review is titled So Excited, and it reads, I've been waiting for a podcast with this content. Can't wait for future episodes. Yeah, that's it. I love a positive review, and just because it's short doesn't mean it's any less sweet. So thanks, Noonybird. I appreciate you. Remember, you too can get a shout out on a future episode if you just leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and be sure to include a written review. Details on how to do this are on my website. Go to lifeeditproject.com/podcast. And of course, that link is in the show notes because I want to help you help me. And 5-star reviews absolutely help put this podcast in front of more people. So every review is helpful and appreciated. Now, let's get down to the get down and talk about head trash, because I know you want to know what that is. So first, I want to anchor this conversation by just describing a few of the terms that I'll be using. Because in addition to hearing me talk about thoughts, you'll also hear a lot about your brain and your mind. And in my world, those are 2 distinct things with 2 distinct meanings. When I talk about your brain, I mean the spongy, wrinkly biological organ inside your head that runs all of your life functions. There's a lot we don't know about how our brains work, but so far, neuroscience and psychology and related fields tell us that the brain is super powerful and different areas of the brain have different functions and serve different purposes. Some of those functions are voluntary while others are involuntary and outside of our conscious control. So when you hear me talk about your brain on this podcast, whether it's in this episode or beyond, I'm talking about the reference frame of biology and neuroscience, even if I'm not being super technical. On the other hand, when I talk about the mind, I'm talking about your capacity to harness the potential of your brain and direct your brain power with intention. I'm talking about what's possible when you do take conscious control of those voluntary functions of your brain. When I talk about the mind, I'm taking the perspective of the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And I'm talking about your capacity as a being capable of self-awareness and imagination and planning for the future that's beyond what should be possible when we look at just the biological makeup of the brain. Part of my philosophy is that your brain and mind are equally powerful parts of you, but they work differently. Your brain is going to be a brain, and it's going to do brain things without you needing to do anything special because it's an organ of your body. But using your mind is a matter of choice, even when you're not consciously aware of the choices you're making. And if you care about personal development, and I'm pretty sure you do because you're here with me, it's in your best interest to learn how to leverage the unique strengths of both your brain and your mind. Now, when I talk about thoughts, I'm referring to any type of cognitive process or mental event that happens irrespective of the brain or mind. And thinking is the process of generating thoughts. There are lots of different types of thinking and different ways that thoughts show up in our awareness. And I don't have time to get into all of that or else we'd be here forever. So today, I want to explain head trash to you using this analogy. Listen in. Your brain runs a 24-hour thought factory. Most of the thoughts it produces are unoriginal and negative. And some thoughts are just waste that are created in the thought factory. And we call that waste head trash. Let's dig into this analogy for real, for real. So we know that our brains are important because the brain is basically responsible for everything that allows you to function and exist as a person. And your brain has many jobs. And one of your brain's jobs is to churn out thousands of thoughts each day. There's a lot of different data floating around on the interwebs about exactly how many thoughts the average person has per day. Some folks point to research out of Stanford University that says that we have between 60 and 80,000 thoughts. But I couldn't actually find a real study, an actual research paper or anything to back up that number. So I'm not saying that number with confidence. And I don't want to be part of the problem of perpetuating misinformation on the interwebs because I'm too lazy to find actual information. There is, however, more recent data from some Canada-based researchers who studied not how many thoughts people have, but rather how frequently our thoughts change direction. So they were able to observe what they called thought worms, essentially chains of multiple related thoughts, and the transition between one thought worm to another. And what they found is that people have around 6,200 thought worms each day during waking hours. So whether we're talking about individual thoughts or thought worms, we do a lot of thinking. And that's because our brains are running what amounts to a 24-hour thought factory that never shuts down and never runs out of material to make more thoughts. Hang on tight because I'm going to run real fast and real deep with this analogy. So I want you to think of your brain as the manager of this thought factory. And there are lots of different kinds of thought products that come out of this thought factory. There's one machine that generates ideas, and another that recognizes patterns, and another that captures and maintains memories, and another that makes judgments, and so forth and so on. When you're born, right, when you're a baby, your thought factory is really basic. But it scales up massively in the first few years and then continues to grow at a more reasonable pace for a few decades. Then at some point, it stops scaling production, right? So it slows down the rate at which it grows, and it just keeps kind of producing thoughts at a steady rate. But even though the growth of production kind of stalls out at some point, the products themselves can still change over time, right? So your brain can always start creating different kinds of thoughts from this thought factory. So at times, it might start making new thought products or pumping out different products at different rates. And maybe even you get a few specialty thought products, right? Like when you have a specialized skill or something like that. So your brain is the manager of this thought factory, and it calls the everyday shots. But your mind is the CEO of the thought factory, and it also sends down some orders and it announces new product lines. And both your brain and your mind are going to make decisions at the thought factory. Now, in addition to that, your life experiences are kind of like the market that you cater to. So your life experiences will influence what kind of inventory your thought factory produces. For example, if you are a creative professional, your creative idea production line in your thought factory might get a lot more use than someone who's, say, a bookkeeper. And if you've experienced some kind of major trauma in childhood, your memory machine might be prioritizing the recall of a particular old experience and not working very hard to capture and recall more positive current experiences as they happen. Right? So each of us has a thought factory, but the input and output of those thought factories will vary from person to person. You with me so far? Keep hanging in there. So one thing that's going to be pretty common among all of us is that on any given day, 90% of the thought products coming out of your thought factory will be identical to the thought products that were issued the day before. Why? It's not because your brain, the manager of the thought factory, is lazy and unoriginal. It's because your brain is busy. Because in addition to being the floor manager of the thought factory, your brain is also the COO, the Chief Operations Officer of your body's command center. And in both of its roles, in the body command center and the thought factory, your brain's number one directive is to keep you alive. And since whatever it pumped out yesterday in the thought factory didn't kill you, your brain defaults to reprinting 90% of whatever it did the day before because it's the most efficient thing to do. And this just stay alive directive that your brain is following also explains why we have a negativity bias. For most of humanity's existence on this planet, we needed our brains to actively scan for threats in our environment because there was a lot of threats that could potentially kill us if we weren't vigilant. And even though most of the threats that we encounter today are threats to our comfort and not necessarily threats to our lives, our brains are still working from the old operations manual. So as a result, something like 60% of the thoughts your brain produces each day are going to be negative, looking for threats. And if you do a little math, you'll find that 54% of your thoughts each day are both negative and repetitive. You've got negative thoughts on repeat. And if you're thinking that thinking mostly negative thoughts on repeat every day of our lives sounds like not a fun way to live, I'd say you'd be right. And that's because your brain doesn't care about optimizing the quality of your life. Your brain will order your thought factory to just keep pumping out the same negative thoughts that keep you recreating the same results, even if you don't like them, simply because it takes a lot of effort to change. Change is inefficient, so it doesn't happen automatically on the floor of the thought factory. Hey there. Do you have a burning question that you want a professional life coach to answer for free? Good news. Episode 10 of this show is all about you getting the answers you need. Check the show notes for a link to the submission form where you can ask me anything and ask as many questions as you like. I can't guarantee that every question will make it onto the show, but I will guarantee that you can remain anonymous if you like, so that your business doesn't have to be on Front Street. Get your questions in by Sunday, July 23rd to be considered, and tune into episode 10 for my response. I can't wait to hear from you. Okay, back to the show. So, continuing with this analogy, I want you to also consider that of all the thoughts that come out of the thought factory, not all of them are valuable. So, some of the thoughts that come out of the thought factory are defective. They don't work right, or they're made from a bad recipe or with faulty plans. Some of these thoughts have a really short shelf life, and their usefulness expires really quickly. Others are really fragile, and if you poke them too hard, they just crumble and disappear. Some are printed in disappearing ink, and they just literally will not last. Some thoughts are really cheap to make, and they get made really quickly, but they're not good quality. Others are going to take a lot of energy and a lot of time to produce, but you can never recoup your investment. Some thoughts are stinky, and even when you get rid of them, the smell kind of lingers for a bit, and you can tell that they used to be there in the room. Some thoughts are even radioactive, and they are literally harmful to you and anyone else that comes in contact with them. Some thoughts that come out of your thought factory were actually assembled at someone else's thought factory and just repackaged at yours, but you don't even know what they're made of. Other thoughts aren't even yours. They literally don't belong to you. They're just sitting in your storage area, taking up space and preventing you from having space and room for your own thoughts. Some thoughts are grouped together and stacked like Jenga blocks. And if you fiddle with the wrong one, the whole stack can come crumbling down. Some thoughts are so old, they're tucked in the back of a dark room that you haven't visited in years, and maybe you've even lost the key and you don't even know it's there anymore. And maybe you forget about these old thoughts, and maybe those thoughts, they start to get a little moldy, and then they start contaminating other thoughts around them. But sometimes these old thoughts, they just fade away. And when you go looking for them, you can't find them. Despite all of the wonderful, beautiful, amazing thoughts that your thought factory can create, a lot of the inventory that's lying around is just junk. Head trash. And your thought factory is making new head trash every day, because head trash is a byproduct of generating any kind of thought. So if you don't make an effort to take out the head trash on a regular basis, things can get really gross and inhospitable. And the thought factory itself becomes less productive and less effective. So, what do you do about all this head trash? That's a great question. I'm so glad you asked. I've got 3 suggestions for you. 1, collect and separate the trash. 2, process the trash regularly. And 3, have your CEO mind supervise and streamline production. Let's take these one by one. So, first, you're going to collect and separate the trash. Fun fact, as I was doing some research for this episode, I discovered that the Greek city of Athens was one of the earliest cities known to pass a law about waste disposal. And this was around 500 BC. So Athens passed a law requiring its citizens to take their trash a mile out of the city. But before that, people were literally just dumping their trash in the streets, which was not only ugly, but it was also unsafe. It would attract wild animals, and it led to diseases. So head trash is very similar. You need a place for your head trash to go where it can do as little damage as possible. If you just let the head trash stay wherever it lands, the entire infrastructure of your mindset can get contaminated. So you need a way to collect it, to corral it, and put it somewhere until you can process it. Second, you're going to process the head trash regularly. So there are lots of different ways to process head trash, depending on what it is. So you can dump it. That is to say, you can just let it go. So let's say I have the thought, I look ugly. That thought, that's just trash. That's literal trash. I am going to release that thought and let it go. But if a trash thought has an element of usefulness, then you might want to repair and recycle it. So for example, if I look at my reflection in the mirror and I say, oh man, my butt looks so big in these jeans, that in and of itself is kind of a trash thought because it's negative and it's not useful, right? But there's an element in there that maybe I want to take and repurpose. So maybe instead of telling myself my butt looks too big, maybe I say, the cut of these jeans really accentuates my curves. Right? So I've taken that thought and I've kind of upcycled it and repurposed it, right? And now I can use that. So another way to process head trash is to consider using it in a different way. So let's say a thought no longer serves you in one area of your life. You might be able to repurpose it and apply it in another area of your life instead. And other times, there are thoughts that are just toxic. Remember I mentioned radioactive thoughts? So a thought may be so dangerous that you might need to decontaminate it before you dispose of it. So maybe you've been struggling with a really harmful, toxic thought about yourself. Like maybe the thought, nobody ever likes me. Or I'm not beautiful enough to be in a loving relationship, right? That might be a really radioactive thought for you. And you might need to deconstruct it first so that you can strip it of its power so that you're then able to release it, right? So after you've collected and corralled all the head trash, you'll need a way to process that head trash according to what it needs, right? So that your trash bins don't just overflow and create a problem. And then third, you want to have your CEO mind supervise and streamline production. So we've established your brain is going to be a brain. It's always going to be predisposed to do whatever is most efficient. And what's most efficient for your brain is to keep thinking what it's been thinking, right? But because your mind is the CEO of the thought factory, it can make conscious decisions to override the brain's default. Because your CEO mind is a boss, and I mean the big boss, it can do whatever it wants. And your CEO mind's number one priority is to optimize the quality of your life. So you can decide with your CEO mind to introduce more helpful, less trashy thoughts more often on purpose, right? So if 90% of your thoughts are repetitive and unoriginal, that means 10% of your thoughts are new, right? You can make a choice, an intentional choice to, with that 10% of new thoughts that you're having every day, to make them really high quality, non-trashy thoughts, right? Your CEO mind can also decide to produce more or less of a particular kind of thought based on what's needed to deal with situations as they arise and based on what you want to create in your life, right? So you don't have to keep thinking a particular way just because that's what you're used to. You can actually direct the nature of your thoughts. And what happens is that when your CEO mind starts spending more time on the floor of the thought factory instead of being up in the office doing paperwork, it can respond faster to mishaps and potentially avoid creating unnecessary head trash, right? So you can cut the head trash before it even gets started. And your CEO mind can also help identify the biggest sources of head trash in your thought factory so that you know where to focus your cleanup. And the best part about all of this is that when your CEO brain makes these kinds of decisions consistently and over time, your brain notices and it learns. Because remember, your brain is still pretty awesome. So eventually, your brain can learn to create quality thoughts and less trashy thoughts more efficiently. And then your CEO mind can go back up to the office and start dreaming up the next big goal or whatever. Right? So those are three ways that you can take out the head trash, right? The 3 steps of taking out the head trash. So to recap, your brain runs a 24-hour thought factory where it prioritizes keeping you alive in the most efficient way possible. That translates to keeping your thought factory churning out a bunch of unoriginal, negative thoughts because the bar is just set really low to stay alive. You've got to use your CEO mind to override your brain and make strategic decisions about what to think and not think, and when and how to clean up the inevitable head trash that's constantly being created. If not, the head trash will contaminate more and more of your thoughts and more of your mindset over time, and your thoughts will eventually become less effective and less productive and just all around less helpful to the kind of life you want to live. So please ma'am, please sir, please human, take out your head trash before your thinking starts stinking. I'm kind of corny for making that joke, but okay. Now, if you have no idea where to start, that's a great reason to hire me as your professional life coach. I will help you sort through your thoughts to separate the treasure from the trash and process the head trash as needed. And I'll help train your CEO mind so that you can take out your head trash whenever you need to, all by yourself. And that's just one benefit that my coaching clients get when they work with me. Book a free sales call with me to learn about all the other ways that my coaching services can help you. Go to bit.ly/coaching please to schedule your call today. And of course, that link is in the show notes, and I'm ready to get started whenever you are. In the meantime, tune in next week for another juicy conversation about a particular kind of head trash, and I'll give you some tips on how you can start cleaning that head trash up on your own. All right? Until then, peace. Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Life Edit Project podcast. I'd love to hear what your favorite moment or key takeaway was from this conversation. You can send me a message on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter to let me know. My handle is @LifeEditProject, all one word, in all the places. My social media is linked up in the show notes to make it easy for you. Holla at your girl. I'll be back next week with another episode. In the meantime, don't just stay busy with the life you have. Get busy creating the life you want.